to hear my opinion about your album. Welcome to Unwarranted Music Opinions. I'm Jacob Lindberg here with Brian Courtney.
Hey.
And Chaz Jenkins.
Hey.
And this is the final regular episode of the show where we all choose an album and we force each other to listen to them. We reconvene at the end of the week and we talk about how we feel. And as it is our final episode, we had to have a theme that reflects this. And there's no better theme than favorite albums of all time.
I'm just glad I got my Saturdays back.
We're going to put a stamp on the whole show with basically ranting and raving about the albums that claim the top spot and are just absolute favorites. So I think we're going to start it, and we're going to do the same order as Chaz mentioned because you're a huge fan, I guess, of this like poetic symmetry.
Always.
You can't chop down.
It's in some of the best albums we've talked about. They did the same stuff.
You can't chop down the symmetry, man.
Same order that we did our first
when
episode.
Jacob kissed me here. Why didn't he kiss me on the other side too?
I'm going to start with Sun Kill Moon, which I guess makes this a third-parter sequel episode. We've already talked about Mark Kozlik's work with Red House Painters and Down Colorful Hill.
So we've talked about Buckethead 3 times, and we've talked about Mark Kozlik 3
and
times.
Brockhampton as well.
And I failed Death Grips by not bringing them on.
And we also talked about Benji, Sun Kill Moon, Mark Kozlik's 2014 release, that basically both of those albums represent his early career and his late career. We're going to talk about his mid-career with the debut album from Sun Kill Moon, Ghosts of the Great Highway, released in 2003. So this album is a far cry from Red House Painters, at least the earliest Red House Painters, and I would say that there are some pretty significant differences from the Benji era as well. I would characterize this album as being, I guess the closest comparison I can make is probably Neil Young. There's a lot of Neil Young-isms here from his vocals, which are not as youthful as Red House Painters, but not as aged as later era, like 2010s Mark Kozlik. It's very Neil Youngian. His compositions are relatively similar, I would say. And he does this thing that I think Neil Young also does very, very well, and that is writing a song like, for example, on this album, Salvador Sanchez, with a distorted guitar sound. And it's such a Neil Young guitar sound on this song, but making the chord progression still very folk-influenced and bittersweet, and it gives this fairly unique feel to it. This album is basically a folk rock record, but it has elements of, I guess, alt country, if you wanted to frame it that way. It's very subtle, I would say. And then there's a little bit of that Red House Painters slowcore on just a few tracks here in terms of the repetitiveness of the songwriting on occasion and the way that he just sort of lets these songs play out over relatively lengthy runtimes. This album, I have been listening to it for... I probably got into this album in 2014 because that's when I was introduced to Sun Kill Moon through Benji. So I've been listening to this album for a long time, and it wasn't my favorite very quickly. I had to listen to it a lot, and it slowly
in true
grew on me.
Lindbergh fashion.
And it became my favorite album not because like I had one listen where it clicked and it just kind of jumped into the top spot, which has happened before. It became my favorite album because when I was making a list, and it was probably 2018, I realized that of every single album that I was listening to, like the one that I had consistently returned to just the most often, and when it came down to it that I would choose, was Ghosts of the Great Highway. So this album has a lot of significance to me, and I'm hoping that I don't have to make you repent, and I'm got my fingers crossed.
I mean, I'm a big Kozlik fan. Like, I pretty much was guaranteed to enjoy this quite a bit. And I did. I do have some hang-ups, but I mean, mostly it's really good. And it's not really that far from, I think, modern-day Kozlik, who's gone, like, and, like, we've heard...
Gone off the deep end?
Yeah,
Is that what you're about
exactly
to say?
what I was going to say. Because, like, you know, Benji is kind of this blend of this storytelling and this songwriting, and now we have a 12-minute song about him going to, like, a hotel. And that's not a joke. And he's, you know, and he details like, you know, on Benji's, like, here's a story about Jim Wise. You know, here's me talking about a letter I got from a guy in Newtown and kind of talking about shootings in general. Carissa's, like, about his cousin, and then Truck Driver's about how you know, it's kind of a connection between those two stories. No, not anymore. 12-minute song about a hotel where he mentions changing room 3 times, once because traffic was loud and once because the elevator motor was really loud.
And how does this connect to Ghost of the Great Highway?
Because it's not dissimilar, honestly, because he is still kind of picking these weird, once you really listen to his discography, his extensive discography, even just a little bit, like Kozilek-isms of just like boxing, like talking about boxing, love, life, and death, but like a quiet reflection, one that's meditated. I think that because he takes so much time to think about these things, it's a little easier to digest on a record like this instead of what he's doing now, because he would speak a little more frankly, like stream of consciousness, but this seems like he's very much thought about what he wants to say. He's taken time to write the songs out. He's not on his porch eating chili lemon peanuts, like writing the lyrics. So I do like that aspect of it, that we're kind of, we've got this middle ground, and this is before Benji, so it just seems like such a precursor, even though it's so far away from the 2010s where he really started doing stuff like Benji. But I totally read it as, you know, as far as picking the topics and how he's choosing to dive into them by, you know, numerous times on this record, using boxers to portray that. I just think that's, it's really cool. And it's, you know, it's not foreign to Kozilek, and I think it totally forecasts what he would go on to do. I also think because it's the debut for Sun Kill Moon, that maybe informed that a little bit. He kind of wants to, you know, because Sun Kill Moon is a direct reference to a boxer. It's the name of a boxer named Sung Kill Moon, but he just, you know, very slightly altered it. I think it's a fantastic debut. The playing is pretty much rock solid on the whole thing. I do think the distorted guitar on Salvador Sanchez becomes a touch grating, just because the song runs about 5 minutes, I think. And by the time we get to the end of that track, I'm a little tired of it, but it was a nice splash, like after the first 2 tracks, which are probably the 2 favorites on the whole record for me. Glenn Tipton and Carry Me Ohio. I get the hype about Carry Me Ohio. I love that chorus to pieces.
The chorus is so unexpected. It goes, like the chord progression just goes in a really interesting way. Like I've learned how to play that song. Yeah, and it just goes like, takes a completely unexpected direction, and it's such a heartfelt song as well. I
like the way he uses the syllables of Ohio, like they're just syllables to get. I didn't even really know he was saying Ohio until I was looking at the lyrics later. So I just thought it's a gorgeous song. His singing on here is like next level. It kind of makes me wish he would do it a little more in his newer stuff, but
he does it like up through, I would say, like Benji, I think is one of the first albums where his singing style kind of turns into a more spoken word. But he has this singing style pretty much all throughout the 2000s. And there are other albums kind of like Ghost of the Great Highway, April, and then Admiral Fell Promises, despite being a lot more skeletal musically.
Yeah, I really like this. Like my hangups are pretty few and far between. I just think some of the songs have some elements to them that, like, due to song length, just grow off me as the song progresses. But it's still, you know, mostly pleasant. Like that happens with Salvador Sanchez, and just a touch with Dooku Kim. Even though I do like, you know, what he's saying on that track quite a bit. I do think I get, you know, it's an epic. It's meant to be him, you know, going into super detail, giving lots of examples to kind of express how he's feeling. But I do think the song runs a touch long. I don't really totally think the length is justified, but I mean, it's still fine. You know, I don't hate it at any point. Yeah, and
Interject,
I guess
Chaz.
Yeah, go
Brian,
ahead.
Look like
shut
you want
the
to.
hell up, Brian.
Yeah,
You talk so
sorry.
goddamn much.
Yeah, I know. My bad.
All right, so some favorite tracks. Definitely Carry Me Ohio. That's probably my only favorite track from the first half. The back half, though.
Damn, son, you don't like Glenn Tipton?
It's good, but like Gentle Moon is my favorite song for sure. Gentle Moon is fire.
Now, the reading on Genius, sorry to interrupt you, but reading on Genius for this song, this is, when Kozilek did an interview for this is actually a song about 9/11.
Really?
And he was like, I just didn't want to, he was like, everyone, he's quoted as saying, everyone made some dumb song about it. So I just wanted, he was like, I wanted to reflect in my own quiet way. And like the lyrics don't reflect that at all. It's just kind of
Gentle Moon, Find Them Soon. He's talking about the people who died. I
Yeah.
think.
Like it's not maybe, oh, I love the line too about souls rise higher than fire. That's gorgeous. That is like,
And that's where you can tell kind of what he's talking about.
perhaps, yeah, he's alluding to it. But I think the song still works in a vacuum.
It's
where
one of
not
the most
about, you know.
gorgeous songs I've heard for this podcast and in music in general. But yeah, tracks 6 through 10 are almost like just across the board flawless. Like the back half of this album is just stunning. Because the first half is decent, but it just kind of takes a while before it gets its footing. And then when Gentle Moon hits, like, we skyrocket. Lillian Parrots, I love that crunchy guitar. I was not expecting some, like, distorted crunch from Kozlik, so that was really cool.
I think that one goes over better than Salvador Sanchez.
So then we get to track 8, Duke Kokim.
Duck Kukim.
Duck Kukim. Who knows?
Oh, yeah, I guess Duck would make more sense.
That's kind of
than
the way
Duke.
that he pronounces it.
Yeah.
Duck Kukim.
It's good, but tracks 8, 9, and 10, we start to get into Red House Painter's level of, okay, we get it, move on. Just a smidge. I like the melodies, I like the playing a lot more than Down Colorful Hill, but it's still like, I'm kind of with Brian. It gets to a point where it almost doesn't justify it. It just, there's this, it's kind of like Trucker's Atlas and Modest Mouse.
See, these are terrible takes, including the Trucker's Atlas take.
I like it, it's just, move on.
I don't like the Trucker's Atlas take, but I do agree. Like, I think Pancho Villa is just
I
a touch
will
long.
admit, though, Si Paloma, I could listen to that all day.
It's a little awkward because it's like the subject matter of the songs around Si Paloma, like, are, you know, I think Si Paloma is just an instrumental, right?
It
I think
is.
it's a perfect. I think the back half has an absolute perfect flow. Like the
Yeah.
It does.
front
It-
half
for
has
sure.
some of my favorite songs as well. But like when you mention Gentle Moon through Pancho Villa, you know, you have Gentle Moon, easily one of the more, I'd say, accessible songs on the album, into Lillian Parrots, which is easily like the most pop rock-esque song
For sure. And it's a
of
nice
this era.
It's
of-
a welcome
of
change too.
His
In
discography.
the album.
Yeah, it's a he does mix up the sound quite a bit on here. I think the flow is a lot better in the second half too. I think there's flow in the first half.
Oh yeah, I think the whole album flows incredibly. But when we're talking about Doku Kim into Si Paloma, Doku Kim is probably it's definitely like top 3.
Wow, a 14-minute
this
song is
album.
one of Jacob's favorite
But-
songs.
but-
Who would have guessed?
This song is, I think, absolutely incredible, and it's one of his best longer songs. I think it's right up there with like Medicine Bottle or Tonight in Bilbao from April. This track, the way that the production is, the way that it sounds, the atmosphere that is on this song, and with his lyrics and vocal delivery about essentially just trying to, I don't know what the word is that I'm trying to think of here, but just grapple with the idea that you're gonna die and it could happen at any moment.
I love the jamming too.
And then
it is
the
nice.
second half of the song, it's just this epic, and it kind of gives this very large, very weighty, it's very bleak and desolate. And that's why when you get Si Paloma right after it,
this happy upbeat mandolin kind of
this like Spanish guitar kind of influenced song, it really, really works because Doku Kim is 14 and a half minutes, and by the end of it, you are feeling about as existential as you could possibly be, and then you get this like 5.5 minute instrumental that's like the calm after the storm, which goes right into Pancho Villa, which
Great
is the
closer.
same
Yeah.
chord progression as Salvador Sanchez, but it's an acoustic version with strings.
And it's
Beautiful.
It has the refrain from one of the other songs, does it not? Does it not borrow the same? I could have.
It's Salvador Sanchez.
It is
It's the
okay.
same lyrics.
I
it's the
couldn't.
same-
I was trying to figure it
Yeah.
out this morning, and I don't know why, but I thought so hard it was Glenn Tipton. I was completely wrong. Because I was like, this calls back to a part on the album. It's a great callback, by the way. It's a great way to wrap up the album.
Yeah, and it's
It reminds me of when Billie Eilish like mentions like the main lyrics from each of her songs in the closer. It kind of reminded me
Yeah,
of that.
I kind of like that because it feels like the album closes, and with this album being about an hour long, it kind of needed as good of a
Solid close.
Yeah. as
and
it
it
did
leaves you
open.
with a more like it gives you a feeling of bittersweet. Whereas Doku Kim, if that was like the closer, you'd be
strong
feeling
for.
like death is inevitable. But when it ends with Pancho Villa, which is a reimagining of Salvador Sanchez, where the chord progression is taking place like higher up the neck, and it's just like higher, just sweeter
it's
sound
just slightly
all around.
different. It takes a few listens
Yeah.
to realize you're hearing the same thing again.
It's the same tune, but musically, and from a performance aspect, it's considerably different, and it just it recontextualizes it, and I think it's a really, really great way. And he's done this before, where he's doing different versions of the same song on the same album. Like on the Red House Painters album Roller Coaster, you have the song Mistress, which is like a shoegazy kind of song, and then there's a piano ballad version of it later on the album, and
More
It has the
reprises,
opposite
please.
effect where the piano version is sadder than the shoegazy version, but it's kind of a similar idea.
I think Benji's better though, especially lyrically. This album's decent. I don't think it's as strong lyrically as some of other Kozlik's work though. I actually think Down Colorful Hill's better lyrically than this album is, and Benji's tops. You can't get any better than Benji, I think, lyrically, in my opinion.
I think
So I think that takes it away from it just a bit for me.
I think the songwriting may be stronger here.
Yes,
I like
for
the
sure.
I like the like Benji has a lot of different ideas on it as well, but it's a lot more cohesive than this record, I would argue.
Oh, I
But I-
disagree completely.
But I think that this one is still, it's still cohesive and it still has very good songwriting. I there would maybe be days where I kind of prefer songwriting like this, but I'm just so into Kozlik's modern era. You know what I mean? Like it's weird to talk about because it's so specific to Kozlik, everything that I prefer about his other records. You know what I mean? But as a record on its own, in a vacuum, as a folk rock record, I mean, this is really great. Like, I mean, even just, if there's a record to put on, this is a really good record because I think it's only going to
and
grow
that's
on you.
kind of what it was for me initially. Like, I listened to Benji and I preferred Benji for a very long time. But this was just like an album that I would put on. Like, it's a phenomenal driving album just because of the folky aspects.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The way that the songs have this, like Salvador Sanchez, how it kind of jams. It's a perfect driving album for like this region, like driving through hills.
mountains.
Like if you're,
Yes.
yeah, and it has this kind of rustic quality to it. That's in his vocal delivery, and it's in just how, like on Glenn Tipton, the
vocals are the-
acoustic guitar melody near the back half, which I think is absolutely beautiful. And one thing that I really have to point out on this album is how incredible the melodies are. Like this
Oh, yeah.
album, as far as melodies go, is completely top notch. And the way that it flows, like for example, Glenn Tipton being a sort of stripped back ballad into Carry Me Ohio, which is, you could say it's a little more Red House Painters-y. You have a guitar tone that's more distorted, but not quite. It just has this bittersweet feeling. It's very, again, it's kind of like a Neil Young Powderfinger kind of situation. Salvador Sanchez, where it gets even more Neil Young-y. But then Last Tide into Floating, which just flows in perfectly. It's a seamless transition into Gentle Moon. And we've mentioned how Gentle Moon flows to the last track pretty much perfectly. The whole album, as an hour of music, is extremely cohesive and it flows from front to back without a hitch. There's not a single song here. Even Lily in Paris, which is kind of stylistically different, I think serves a great purpose in the track listing.
It's a decent
The fact that it comes before Doku Kim and it kind of
Yeah.
offers levity before you get into this like
it's incredibly
existential
smart. Yeah.
behemoth.
It's like a Red House Painters song, kind of, I think, Dooku Kim. But it definitely feels more
more
like...
poppier, though.
It feels more like
Doku Kim
Kozlik's.
is not poppy
Oh,
at
I
all.
thought we were talking
oh,
about
yeah.
Lily in
It
Paris.
feels more like his solo work, for sure, but I think there's just a touch of Red House Painters
Oh,
in
I
there.
think there's definitely a lot.
There's a
And
touch of Red House Painters in the back half.
throughout the whole album,
sure.
there is. Even on Carry Me Ohio and Salvador Sanchez, the drummer from Red House Painters is on this album, and you can tell from the drumming style. I think that's what gives it a lot of Red House Painters feeling, because the drumming on Red House Painters, it has like a marching feeling sometimes, you know? You get that especially on like Down Colorful Hill, like the title track. And you get that kind of same style with a lot of like snare fills happening all over this thing. And it's definitely reminiscent of Red House Painters. So the songwriting, like, it does have that slowcore element to it sometimes, especially on Carry Me Ohio, Salvador Sanchez, Doku Kim. A lot of the rest of it is more folk.
I think what brings this
Oriented.
album up, though, is vocally it's probably one of Kozlik's best.
Yeah, his singing is
It's
great, man.
fantastic.
Wow.
And the instrumentation is solid. Like, I love the very, like, Spanish, folky melodies.
He would go
and
even
playing.
further into that with you got to hear the album Admiral Fell Promises, which has tons of flamenco influence, and it's just him. It's just vocals and guitar, and it's him like having practiced and like specifically set out to make an album where he had to really get better at playing. Like he wanted to make an album that would challenge him. So I think if you want more in that, Admiral Fell Promises. But I agree, you get that in spades.
And
here.
I mean, God, that back half is just so solid. Even if Doku Kim is 14 minutes, I do like it.
I want it to go on for another 14 minutes.
Shut up, Jacob. I
It's
want
like-
C. Paloma to go on for 14 minutes. But
makes-
no, we can't have everything we want. God damn it.
It makes me feel like the way I feel at the end of the movie Bridge Over the River Kwai, where I'm like, Whoa, okay. Like, you're emotionally
movie.
drained. It just drains you. You know how, like, at the very end, that scene where well, I don't want to spoil it.
The
you
dog
know, the
makes
movie
it.
from the 50s, but when a character, like, sinks to the ground and is like, what have I done? Mm-hmm. Like, that's the feeling that you get at the end of Doku Kim, and the fact that C Plum was right after it. And it's just, again, when you're driving, like, I always feel that the length of an album when you're driving has a different context.
Yeah.
You know, and so when that one finally ends and you get into it, it's just like an emotional, it's more of a feel-good moment. It kind of tries to lift you back up when Pancho Villa just takes you out.
So why is
on
it
a high
called
note.
Ghosts on the Great Highway? And what's the album cover like of a small child? It's like a sepia tone black.
Well, sepia tone is like a cosmic standard at this point.
Yeah.
Look, I'm thinking about the cover of Roller Coaster, I think, is the same way. And so is their...
So is Bridge.
Yeah,
So
and,
is Down Colorful Hill. Like, it's just sepia all across the board. It gives it this, like, faded,
His next album is gonna be
nostalgic
called
But now we
sepia.
have modern Kozlik who's like, oh, I need an album cover, and just snaps a picture of his cat, and it's blurry.
Oh, yeah.
I think Ghosts of the Great Highway is a very good album cover because
What's it mean, though? Like, because I'm sure you know.
I think it's, well, I don't know specifically what he sought out to make it mean,
I
but
think it's a reference to one of the lines. I think he just kind of maybe picked a line and kind of went
Because
with that.
Benji is mentioned in Benji.
He talks about one of the some of the railroad tracks that were paved over in Carry Me, Ohio, I think, and maybe that refers to Great Highway Ghost, a reference to all the death. He talks about like all the dead he talks about on the album, including the September 11th the victims and the boxers. I think maybe that informs it a little bit. I think it's those two things coming together.
I think there's a lot of like Americana in the lyrics here, like Nebraska era Bruce Springsteen here, like the new wave of American movies in the 60s and 70s where it's this very stark, oftentimes not very glamorous look. And you get this in like the music that he's drawing from. And you get this on like Glenn Tipton where he's telling these stories that oftentimes don't have happy endings. And I think the Great Highway, I think just represents like life in general,
Yeah,
with
like-
this like tinge of Americana to it, where like you get this like Badlands. Have you seen the movie Badlands?
No, I
Martin
have not.
Sheen and Sissy Spacek. It's kind of like that element of, trying to, and of course, Martin Sheen in that movie does it by killing some people, but trying to, by changing something or by doing something, exerting an influence on the world around you that kind of reminds you that you're alive. I think that's sort of the tone that this album sets, because it is just extremely existential. It kind of, every time you listen to this album, I wouldn't call it depressing, but it sort of
Right.
makes you think in a similar way to Benji, but from a much more poetic
And a much more,
style.
I think, like inward looking
Yeah, it's a very introspective.
and less
for sure.
observing. It's more of internal conflict, kind of looking at that.
I'm feeling a strong 8.
Oh, we were both going at the same time, right? That's funny.
Yeah.
I would say like a light to decent 8.
Because it's not as good as Benji, but it's better than Down Colorful Hill. I think musically, it's probably one of the best Cosmic albums you've picked. But some of the length of the jams go on a little too long. It's just not as strong lyrically, in my opinion. But I think, and I've said this many times, but I think where it's really good, it's fantastic. And the back half is just so strong. I just wish the front half for me was as solid. I can't explain why it isn't as solid. I just feel it. Like when track 6, I'm really into the album. I'm kind of more just, listening along through 1 through 5. So it'll probably grow on me for sure. But I think as like just how Mark Kozlik has put his stamp on this podcast, it's a good album to end on, I think.
He's such a prolific, I hope he goes down as one of the most eccentric songwriters ever, because I
I
really
think he almost already has.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like there's no casual fan of Kozlik. I feel like you just ride with him, listen to all of his stuff because you just grow more and more interested. And while there's stuff I prefer to this is just another great Kozlik record, and I'm not saying that to take away from it. It's just this is pretty consistent quality wise for him, honestly.
The perfect setting for this album is like if you're driving on the AA highway in October.
Dude, I haven't been on the AA in so long. It's weird. It's weird that that's nostalgic for me. Damn, son, you just dug up some stuff inside of me. Double A highway.
Drive on the double A in October
That's going to come up next.
as you're driving through like Fleming County. All right. That's the best possible setting to listen to Ghosts of the Great Highway.
Double A highway, that intersection right before you go left. No way. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's
I haven't thought about that in so long. You don't realize why that's so important. That's going to come up in the TPAP discussion. Wow.
And that's just the feeling that I get for this album. Like, the more that I've listened to it, it's been like the ultimate grower for me because it just continually gets better and better and better. And I've mentioned this with Down Colorful Hill, but like I could sit in these songs forever. Similarly, like Duck Koo Kim is kind of like Down Colorful Hill, where even though it's long, like I could just have it keep going and going and going, and I'd be totally fine with it. Obviously, it's a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
This album is completely fantastic from a songwriting, lyrical perspective, vocals. The melodies are just amazing. And the compositions are fantastic too. The instrumentation is great. Yeah, and I love that this album represents a totally different sound. Maybe not totally different, but at least a noticeably, markedly different sound than the other eras of his discography. Because you could hate the stuff that he's putting out nowadays, and a lot of people, like, it's divisive. You could come back to this album and enjoy it in a completely different context than Red House Painters or anything he's released in the 2010s. And
It's a strong 5 for you for sure, right?
for my money, this is my favorite. Benji's pretty close behind, but yeah, this is like a top. Well, you know, I could just keep rambling and ranting. It's very, very high up there.
The record I picked was Kendrick Lamar's 2015 classic, To Pimp a Butterfly.
And in true fashion, just like when Illmatic dropped, in 2015, the Wiggles released not one, but 2 bangers, Rock and Roll Preschool and Meet the Orchestra.
You're
Hey, I'm glad this is our last episode. Holy
on
crap.
some mighty thin
Wow.
ice. God. I have a headache.
Had to look that up. I had to scroll through their discography.
Did you look at that just now?
No, I had that planned.
Okay. It seemed planned. This is a hip-hop album. It's conscious
You do
hip.
not sound excited. This is a hip
But
hop.
Chaz is really taking the wind out of my sails. This is a conscious hip-hop record. Jazzy, jazz rap. Definitely like jazz rap. I wouldn't say influence. It is jazz rap through and through, pretty much on every song. Here's a couple of moments that stand out as not totally jazz, but few and far between. This is pretty much his most praised release and pretty much the most praised album of this decade. I mean, it's hard to find an album with this much consensus of, yeah, it's amazing. And amazing. Because it is. In my mind, there were a couple of records that I thought were better than this leading into the show, but re-listening to this has to be my favorite record of all time. There's too much tied to it. You mentioned the Double A Highway. And you're in the last bit, and that set me off because that's where I've heard this album the most is driving up that highway, going to Cincinnati, because I used to go to Cincinnati a lot, and this was the record I would listen to because it was so good I didn't mind to hear it pretty much every weekend, and that was to and from. It was this and Atrocity Exhibition that I listened to pretty much nonstop. Wow, I don't even know where to start with this record. I listened to this driving home. This is my ultimate car album. I've heard this in the vehicle so many times. I heard this through speakers and headphones for the first time for this podcast. I've pretty much only heard it in the car. Yeah, I don't even know what to say. I know whole songs on here, or at least a chunk of the lyrics for like a verse to every song here. The poems I've pretty much memorized just from hearing it so much. I've never even talked about this record. You know what I mean? I haven't even gotten in a setting like this, or when we talk about music in general, I barely bring this record up because it's almost hard to talk about because it's just so there's so much here. I remember when I first heard this record was the year it came out, and I was looking for new music. I had played Against Me to death at that point. I heard all the records multiple times, and I was like, I've heard about Kendrick Lamar. He just dropped a new music video for King Kunta. Listen to that. I'm like, okay, this song's amazing. And then I started listening to the record, and I never made it all the way through until maybe a few months later, but I had heard the first 5 songs plenty of times at that point. And then by the time I finished the whole thing, I was like, wait. There's a lot more here. And then that was also how I got into watching music reviews with Fantano, because I was like, Anthony Fantano, a music critic on YouTube, the most famous music critic, by most notorious anyway, most well-known, I guess I should say. And that's how I got into watching his videos, and that was kind of my gateway to music. But really, it all started with, like, if it didn't start with Against Me, it started with this album. And we're not even, and that's before we even get to the content of the record. I mean, it's a great record. It's amazing. Kendrick covers, like, a personal story, and that's
It's
what
a
I
concept album through and through.
That's what I love about it so much. It's like, it's his personal, because on the surface, you might be like, okay, this is kind of an album about the struggles of, like, a black man in America and, like, why being famous for a black man. But really, it's about Kendrick. And that's what makes it so good, is it's his story. And therefore, as an individual tells their story, it becomes much more sympathetic. It's easy to be, it's much more relatable. You really struggle with Kendrick on this record at his lowest moments, and you really, want to be with him on the highs. And it's just hard to find an album that makes you, like, want to love yourself, man. Like, that, it's such a important record for that, because there are other records that kind of help me find my way there, but, like, when I come back to this record to talk about it for this show, I start thinking about it in that way. And it does a lot for me in that respect.
So I heard the single Blacker the Berry when it first came out. And I hadn't really heard much in the way of modern hip-hop by that point, except for maybe Run the Jewels, which I think the first Run the Jewels album came out a couple years before.
That's a really, I don't know, that's funny to me, because, like, having heard all the records, it's like, and then you found Kendrick, like, RTJ to Kendrick. I guess that's a logical
That's pretty much
leap.
where I went,
Killer
yeah.
Mike's mentioned on this album. Wow.
But I at that point, in 2015, I was keeping up with new stuff, but I wasn't keeping up with hip-hop very much. And I had even heard bits and pieces from Good Kid, Mad City, and it was just a sound, like the modern hip-hop sound wasn't something that I connected to all that much. I was much more a fan of, like, 90s jazz rap and boom bap and hardcore hip-hop from that era. So when I heard the Blacker the Berry, of course, I was like, wait, hold on, hold on. And then when this album came out, a lot of people were taken aback by how much soul and funk and jazz is just infused into this album. But when I heard it, I heard shades of, like, A Tribe Called Quest, which is still one of my favorite hip-hop groups. And it was actually easier for me to get into this album than it was for me to get into Good Kid, Mad City, or essentially any other modern hip-hop artist. And so in a way, this was sort of my gateway into listening to hip-hop albums as they were released. And this one, I would go back to Good Kid, Mad City and enjoy it with a completely new perspective. And so when this album came out, the praise was ridiculous when this thing came out. I mean, I have not seen, since or before this album, such ubiquitous praise so immediately, and praise that lasted as well, and that just continues.
It's not like a recency bias thing. We're what year is it? 2019.
This album is not even. This album is not even half a decade old. It's only 4 years old,
and it's still new people who are hearing it are like, hold on.
Well, when a new release comes out, it's so much harder for it to gain, like, quote unquote classic status, because it's just come out. People want to wait for a little while and see how it grows on them. But
not this one.
I wasn't listening to new music at the time, but I don't think there was an album as praised as this one since, like, Arcade Fire's Funeral in 2004, which just changed the game of indie rock in general. Like, I don't think there's anything between 2004 and 2015, with the exception of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Another hip-hop record, yeah, Kanye West.
But, like, those two are the only ones. And then if you have to, you probably have to go even further back. I wouldn't say that Is This It by The Strokes is nearly as acclaimed, as nearly on the same level of just everyone agreeing. Kid A by Radiohead, do you have to go back to 2000?
I can think of one more 2010s record, maybe, that contends with that. It's Kendrick's other record, Good Kid, Mad City. And that's crazy. This is after that. Moreover, it's 4 years after the fact, I think, that he released Good Kid, Mad City. 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. And, like, man, to get a Good Kid, Mad City, another incredible, like, story-driven record, and then to get this, like, it really is, like...
so hard to capture lightning in a bottle twice. Very few bands or groups or artists pull it off.
This is, like, going from, like, capturing lightning in a bottle to, like, throwing the fucking bolts. Because, like, it's such a next... Like, it really is, like, an evolution of an artist. Like, and it's so crazy that he was able to make the leap from Good Kid, arguable 10, in my book to T-Pab, uncontested 10 in my book. Like, never once have I ever been like, is this that? Like, I never even had to think about it.
It's crazy that this album is as acclaimed in a lot of circles as, like,
any number of
classics that are so ingrained in music, like
Dark Side
of the Moon, Abbey Road, albums like that, Pet Sounds. Like this, honestly, maybe it's not as ubiquitous as those because they've been around for so long, but I think one day it probably will be, just because of how overwhelming the praise is. And you don't have to think it's perfect. I don't think it's quite perfect, but I enjoy this album a ton. I've heard it a lot in 2015. It was my album of the year back then, and I've heard it quite a bit since then. But it had been a while since I last heard it, so coming back to it for the podcast was really, really cool. I absolutely adore, more than anything else here, the instrumentation and all of the different
the use
genres.
Of sax is genius.
It sounds so good too. I think there's a lot of live instrumentation. Like you have some really great sampling going on, but there's a lot of phenomenal like bass work from George Clinton on this album,
especially on like For Free. That they call it like a walking bass line. That bass line is like sprinting. Like,
it's basically a jazz cut with Kendrick rapping over it.
The piano, like the way we just listened to it a second ago, so we showed Chaz the music video, which is amazing. But like the way the piano stutter towards the end of the track and the way he stays on top of that, that's like Danny Brown-esque of like, what is this beat and how is this guy rapping on it? I don't even know where to start with like the track list. So what, this is like 17 tracks?
16
songs. It's 78 minutes and 51 seconds long.
Not a wasted moment.
Not a single one. I mean, from the very beginning with Wesley's Theory, which is just like a super funky song that just sets the tone for the whole album.
So I've been recently listening to a podcast where the first season was dedicated to, it's called Dissect, and it was dedicated to picking apart this album song by song. Each song gets like a 40-minute episode. Some songs get 2 parts that are 40 minutes apiece. And like, it gets pretty insane because they're kind of worthy of that. With all the callbacks and the various,
the genius use of his main poem that the whole album is centered around, To Pimp a
Yeah,
Butterfly,
I guess we
how he
should start
constantly
there.
repeats the first verse of that throughout the album, and then finally, after the whole album, we get it at the end, he tells the whole poem. It's such a satisfying closing.
And not only does so each line of the poem that begins after King Kunta introduces the song and kind of alludes to the subject matter, but by the time we get to the end, not only is each song introduced perfectly in the context of the poem, when you get to hear the whole thing, contextualizes the entire
And the
album.
title of the album as well.
And to me, there are really 3 poems here. It's the one we're talking about that introduces each song. The spoken word kind of freestyle we get on I, where he explains
which is probably the best song.
He
on
explains
the album. It's the best moment. The moment when he starts going off and the crowd simmers down is
chills. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that I don't know, you probably know more than I do, Brian. Is that just like a live recording? How much was that like,
I don't know. But to me, it does sound like it wasn't recorded live. This just sounds like, I don't think that this was recorded live. I don't think you could capture this that way. You know what I mean? This does sound produced. I mean, look at how perfectly the crowd comes in and comes out. How loud the argument gets when it does starts. Like, they wouldn't have mics to pick that up in that crowd. Moreover, it's like, where is he performing that? I think this is a studio recording, but it was a great content. Like the song itself was played live, maybe in a studio or something, or maybe in an outdoor setting. But I don't think that this was played.
It sounds
in front
live.
Of, it sounds live.
The way
I
the
don't
song
know.
sounds like Let
me look it up. I would be blown away. This is just worth looking up.
It does sound live. Like I grew up listening to live Grateful Dead, and the guitars sound. They sound like they're live, and the crowd sound. I mean, you can. That
just
could
how when the crowd starts to like finally
when they're
simmer down,
listening to what he is saying.
When he really picks up.
Because he, throughout this whole album, really wants you to pay attention to what he's saying, because the lyrics here are all about trying to enact change, trying to do something about the various issues that he's confronting.
And if there's any song to lead into the closer, Mortal Man, it's got to be I. I mean,
I is like the real close. Like, Mortal Man is a really good way to rap, but like for me, I really does end the record. And then Mortal Man is like this perfect epilogue we get.
And I love I as a total flip of the song You. You being this completely downtrodden, very, very depressive song with like almost like clinking bottles incorporated into the beat on the beat switch.
Oh yeah, those.
Where he is just in the depths of self-loathing, where you get I, which is just this upbeat kind of guitar-based beat happening where the refrain is I love myself. Like, it's the total turnaround. It's so uplifting. Having it at the end of the album really helps as well, because this album does get very dark on occasion, though it does have, I think, some humor and some levity incorporated into it as well.
So the audio is taken from his SNL performance, it looks like, according to the Genius page, and the crowd is kind of worked in separately. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not, I don't think,
So it's live instrumentation, but the crowd has been added in. But the point that he's making with it.
Yeah, exactly, is much larger.
The argument happening, he's saying, stop fighting amongst yourselves and listen.
Yeah,
listen to what I'm saying.
And that's just a props to the production, because if you hadn't told me that, I would have totally believed that this is like an actual live recording, and he just got the crowd to do that.
It still gives you chills when he starts like really getting into it, and everybody just starts to
like when he gets to how the infamous N-word control us, like, and then they all like you're listening too, like it makes you get drawn into it. I think. So I want to talk a little bit more about the dissect angle, and that the angle that guy takes on his podcast, where he kind of breaks it up. This album is in many different acts. The first act talking about his fame. The second act talking about the second act kind of starts with I believe it starts with You, I think, and starts about to talk this inner self turmoil and how he kind of reconciles that from You to All Right, and then we get into his trials and tribulations, his religious struggles. And then finally, his evolution to like a self-loving, like, okay, like I'm not a perfect person, but I am trying to, I kind of understand my position now, what I can do with that after traveling, when he talks about going back to Africa on Mama and what that revealed to him, how that affected him. And taking that feeling and that knowledge back home is kind of the closer of the album.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfectly, I was just thinking, as you mentioned, that Mortal Man is essentially like I think as an epilogue that works, because he's come to the personal conclusion. He's figuring out his personal struggles, which end on I, and he's saying, okay, well, I'm not perfect, but I can hopefully do something.
Yeah.
And you get the line where, like, I'm paraphrasing here, but if I died in the next line, would you know what I meant, or would you understand what I was trying to say? Where he's saying, like, pay attention. If I wasn't around to explain it to you, would you know what I'm trying to convey?
Now, the last song is 10 minutes, but it is just a normal track, and then the last maybe 6 or so minutes of this album is a rehashed kind of repurposing of an audio interview with Tupac Shakur, who Kendrick is like adores, and the love for West Coast hip hop on this album is through the roof. There are numerous allusions.
Dr. Dre has a moment. Snoop Dogg has a moment.
Obscure references. There are allusions to Busta Rhymes on here you would never catch if someone didn't explain it to you. And that's why I just want to shout out that podcast. Like, it's a very popular podcast, but if you really love this album, I think you owe it to yourself to go listen to the like 4 or 5 hours.
I like Kendrick's reference. I like Kendrick's reference to Weird Al Yankovic in that last song.
It's actually much longer than that.
How he interviews somebody, but I'm kind of memeing here. But I mean, Weird Al actually does do that. He has this this gag where he'll take clips from someone else's interview, like he has an Eminem one, and he'll recreate the background that the actual interview is taking place, so it looks like he's interviewing him. So, I mean, he does the same thing.
Yeah, but the way that he's doing it here is, I think, a lot more serious.
Well,
like,
duh.
Well, yeah, but like, it's a concept that I really haven't
seen
at all.
Like, maybe like taking some old studio sessions, sure. Like, we've seen that a couple times, even this year and last year as well.
The way he performs it to look like he's
and the interview's so cohesive,
and the conversation and the topics,
like you can get brand new meaning out of Tupac's answers because of the way Kendrick's
because I think that he's looking at Tupac as like as an inspiration, as someone who is, I think, trying to do similar things to what he's trying to do, and how everything worked out for Tupac. The interview that audio is taken from was taken from an interview that was 2 weeks before Tupac was shot and killed. And that just makes the end of the whole album.
Oh, when he yells for Pac's name.
I love when he
doesn't respond, and then it cuts off abruptly.
He reads that last poem, and maybe that's an allusion to Pac, but for me it's also an allusion to, okay, these are the new questions. Like, and we need to find answers for these, because, we've maybe seen some of this stuff, because Tupac's talking about a lot of stuff that's totally applicable to stuff at the time. I mean, we're talking about the Ferguson riots, like, as I'm coming out of high school, and like I'm seeing that, and then hearing this interview, and I'm like, a lot of these things are very applicable. Like, it's, you know, what Pac is saying, because like we're kind of seeing it maybe emerge here a little bit. But then when Kendrick gets to the new poem about, well, how, you know, talking about what he's trying to do with this record and what maybe he's, you know, would love to see the result be, and Pac doesn't have anything to say, it's because there's, you know, this is pretty much new. He's like, you know, I need to, and we see allusions to him giving back to as far back as Good Kid, Mad City, and on Section 80 as well. But like on the song Real, where the final voicemail we hear from his mom on that album is like, just, I mean, in the context of having T-Pab right after, I mean, it's crazy, because she's, you know, hey, when you make it, when you get famous, give back to these, you know, give back to these neighborhoods you were in, give back to these, you know.
And he has done that.
Yeah, numerous times. And then to get T-Pab, where he's talking about how he's come to the conclusion of how to do that. I mean, it's just, like, it's rare that the next album is so much better than what was their best album before. And it's rare that two albums are so close in quality that, like right next to each other. I mean, Jesus. Like, there are a number of artists who have a couple of albums, like 2 albums in a row that are amazing, but to experience it in real time, it is awesome.
Taking a look at like the track listing, I think some of my favorite tracks, King Kuta is fantastic. For Free has really grown on me. You's pretty solid. I really love All Right. That I think of, like, that's the big grower for me.
It gives you shivers when you there's that video of protesters singing the refrain to All Right.
Yeah.
And it just kind of shows the effect that this album has had on people.
I think if I had to have a least favorite song, it's probably Hood Politics.
Okay.
The vocals on that kind of grate on me a little bit, to the point where it's a little incessant. But it's not too long of a song.
There's so many great lyrics.
And it picks right back up with How Much a Dollar Costs.
How Much a Dollar Costs, I think, is my favorite song on the album.
That's like a next level track. Personally, like, as far as a total favorite, like, if I had to pick, gun to my head, like Wesley's Theory, adore that song. But like, man, How Much a Dollar Costs, like, narrative, like, it's like a perfect song.
And I love the way that the horns and the strings begin to build. It adds so much tension. And the entire last bit of the verse, where the homeless man is explaining that he is actually God, and the music continues to build and swell, that is shivers the whole way.
Yeah,
It's
just talking about it now.
An insane, impactful moment, and the fact that goes right into Complexion, which is a little bit of a cool down moment.
And one of my favorites on the record, completely underrated song in the context of this album. That Rhapsody verse is, like, amazing. I think
the Snoop Dogg feature and the Rhapsody, like, the features on this are fantastic.
Like, I think the Rhapsody verse actually outdoes Kendrick's verse on Complexion. Her verse is so good. It's so immaculate. I cannot believe she was able to put out a verse like this for this record. Like, because, like, it's a little scary, because Kendrick's alone for most of this record. You know, like, no one's getting a feature verse. So it's like, to bring her on, it just speaks to her talent.
And I love the features on this album as well.
Oh yeah, you got to wonder how she was feeling to, like, have that honor of being.
I just think the context of having been on there now. I mean, her record that she released, that's like a year or 2 years. I think it was 2017. Not long after, was really great. So I mean, it had T-Pab influence all over it.
Yeah,
I
the
think
features are solid. I love the Snoop Dogg feature. This little dude from Compton.
I like the zoom, zoom, zoom. Institutionalized used to be my least favorite song. That's a whack take. There's no bad song.
Not a single one. I think my least favorite, probably Mama, but it's still a great song. Like, it's like choosing the worst song out of, like, a bunch of phenomenal songs.
Like, I don't know.
It's like picking,
It's
very difficult.
I couldn't name everything here. Every track is so necessary, and is so, like, you really can't cut anything out, in my opinion.
I think my biggest issue with this album is that it is dense, and it is kind of a veteran situation here, where, like, I couldn't put this on just to listen to it. I'd have to be in a mood, or, like, I'd have to be in a certain setting, because it's so long and it's so dense with so much material. It's all good, but, like, I mean, and the driving, it makes perfect sense why you'd listen to this driving, because, you know, I remember you telling me, like, you would drive from
here to Cincinnati's 2.5 hours, like 2.5 hours.
I mean,
2
yeah,
hours.
What a perfect album to put on, and it feels like less than an hour when you're putting it on because of that, like, setting. But to sit down and really listen to it, it just goes to the point where by the time we get to I'm like, it's like a Clarity thing where, good God, I have so much and there's still more. You know what I mean?
I think that's a positive. Because it means that this album keeps giving and giving and giving, and every time you listen to it,
I
it
just get
reveals
so
something else.
overwhelmed at a point where I'm like, I got to take a break or something. You know?
It certainly does. Like, I mean, I could understand getting up like right before like For Sale and then just like taking. It's a long. There's a lot to sort through. I'm still getting. It's been like 2 or 3 years since I've heard. No, it's been 4 years since I've heard this record for like all the way through for the first time, and I'm still getting so much out of it every time I listen to it.
I know for a fact I didn't catch everything. I listened to this 4 times, and I know
I'm still getting new stuff.
I know I didn't catch everything.
So recently I was involved in a car accident. No one was hurt or anything like that. I'm only mentioning this because my car is going to be ruled as total because of the age of the car, and I got to drive it back home in like a few days. And it'll be the last time I hear T-Pab in that car, and I can't handle the weight of that. So I'm just so excited to get to, cherry on top. It's a perfect record. It's just literally flawless.
I'm feeling a light to decent 8 on T-Pab.
I can see that. I mean, it's...
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's not... Like, the thing is, like, universal praise doesn't mean everyone thinks it's perfect. I think a lot of people do.
I totally see
it's just one of those,
so praised.
It's one of those situations where, like, I just don't see many people going... I've seen people give it low scores for reasons that I heavily disagree with and I think are a little shallow.
It's a matter of it's just not fully for me, but oh my God, do I see why it is so loved and so appreciated, and I love a lot about it.
I understand this mentality is maybe a little toxic for music conversation, but I just don't get how you can't like this album. Honestly, if you really sit down and listen to it, and really listen to what Kendrick's saying, and and the instrumentation. I mean, if you're a fan of music, you're like a music nerd. This is like made for them. I have such a hard time understanding why not. It's totally valid. I'm not trying to unseat that reason from validity or anything like that, but I just have the hardest time getting like why people dislike it. I could just never see it.
I can kind of see like the way that you feel about this album to a greater extent being kind of the way I felt about JPEG Mafia's Veteran. Though that album has grown on me since we've talked about it. Like, I can see all of the great things that it's doing, but there's just a certain point where it's not always connecting with me on a personal level. This album, though, 100% is just mind-blowing, and like it's still hard to wrap your mind around how great this album is and
just
how
someone in 2015, a year for music that was pretty decent, just came in and
I don't know. It's a really, really good year.
It's a great
year.
There
are 2 10s in that year alone for me.
Again, I'm not too familiar with. I just kind of would pay attention to like what the big stuff that was coming out. Maybe not all the underground stuff, but I mean, this album. Everybody was talking about it when it came out. People are still
This is the same year as the Powers That Be, and for me, that's
Carrie and Lowell as well.
Oh Jesus, Powers That Be came out the same. Well, fuck it. Why are we still here?
This album, I think, is at very least a decent 9, maybe even like a strong 9. When I look at like the track listing here, there's only 2 songs that are 8s.
What's
Every
the other
other
one?
song is a 9 or above.
Because I know you talked about Mama.
It's Mama and For Sale. Those are the only 2, like, but they're still great. And I would say this has a lot of 5s. This has my 5s on here, like songs that I listen to and I'm like, this is pretty much perfect. King Kunta, You, All Right, How Much a Dollar Cost, The Blacker the Berry, I, and Mortal Man.
We didn't even talk about The Blacker the Berry. It's
That
hard
is
to, and that's the thing. It's hard to get into every track on here.
We'd be talking forever.
You just need to go listen to this record because not only is it essential for this decade, even if you dislike it, just go like it's pretty much essential listening for anyone who's getting into music because I think you're going to find a lot to love about music coming out of this decade and the past, from the 2000s on instead of, like there's validity and it's important to explore classics from like the 70s. Like you need to go listen to the Beatles. You need to go listen to some Pink Floyd. You need to, Radiohead, Pet Shop
Boys? Is that what you're about to say?
Pet Sounds.
You should listen to Pet Shop Boys. They're fire, but I mean, that's besides the point.
Like there are a lot of essential records that are much older than this, but this to me is as essential as those. And I would be hard pressed to be made to disagree with that. 10, what do you want? It was gone.
Remember,
We got to talk about Blue now.
Remember, Jacob, this dick ain't free. The album I picked is the Blue album. It's Weezer's debut. Technically just Weezer. It's their self-titled, but I mean, it's the Blue album. And they would go on to create many more color albums. It's kind of like their thing. What do I say about the Blue album? It's a really important album to me for many different reasons. And I think the biggest one is that it truly is the album that inspires me as a musician. I find that the solo work on it, the lyrics, the harmonies, the playing in general, and how just fantastic the production is really goes to show how important this album is and how it's influenced today's music and how it is still just an important album from the 90s. I listened to this album all the time in high school, and it quickly, I knew it was my favorite one because there's not a bad track. And no track is too long, no track is too short. Like, no track on this album, it's flawless. It's a flawless album from front to back. I could listen to it in any setting, in any mood. It's just the album for me. I couldn't tell you a favorite song. They're all my favorite songs. It's just... And coming back to it, it was so cool because I never really did give it a detailed listen. So doing it for this podcast was really cool. I actually found some stuff that I didn't know before. So it just added to it. Man, I mean, almost every song in here I can relate to on a personal level. I can relate to just as a guitar player. I love this band. I fucking hate this band. They piss me off just because of how inconsistent they are and just how great musicians they are and just their potential and just how they...
It's bittersweet.
It's so bittersweet because the closest we ever got to this level of creativity and lyricism and production was the White Album, and since then they just keep slapping their fans in the face.
I love that it says a lot that Blue is so good that Weezer fans keep coming back after Ratitude. That's insane. Because like most...
I mean, no, Ratitude, decent 7. Like, that's a, you know...
Chaz, you're in the minority there.
That's such a good opinion. Such a fuck all them punks. Dude.
Yeah.
It's a great record.
I still think Green's the worst. It's the shortest, but God, name me one.
Ooh, but it has memories.
No,
Hurley that's not. Oh yeah, it's Hurley. Sorry, that one's Green.
Fake fan!
I don't even like Weezer, man.
Don't turn me down. I did that for effect.
No, well I know.
Talk about Blue.
We're
Jesus, I'm gonna talk for hours.
He says, "Don't turn me down," and then peaks.
So I heard Blue years ago. This is an album that I probably discovered as I was first getting into music in high school, and saw its name among a list of a bunch of other albums. So coming back to this album, I was already familiar with it. I already knew what it does. I knew the sound, which is... I love that this album came out in 1994, which there's a lot of phenomenal music that came out in 94. But a lot of it's
one of the best
pretty depressing.
Yeah.
It's kind of doom and gloom a little bit. I mean, right off the top of my head, you have Downward Spiral, Illmatic, Dummy, which is very atmospheric and dark, and a lot of music that was just pretty dark all around. You get Weezer coming out with a power pop album.
A nerdcore, like, emo, alternative. It was just, what a smart time to release it. And keep in mind, this isn't a happy, like, album. There's a lot of sad moments on this, but just the way it's played, the way it's portrayed, it is clear that it's definitely a very bittersweet album. That, because there are some pretty happy songs on here, like Surf Wax America, In the Garage, Buddy Holly, but you have songs like Say It Ain't So, Only in Dreams, The World Has Turned and Left Me Here, some depressing songs. But the music, it's not like grunge levels of like, God, I'm depressed, because the music is poppy enough where it keeps you elevated enough to where you're not totally down in the dumps, which is why, you know, it makes sense that Pinkerton didn't do well, because that is just pretty much just depressed.
It's like super introspective.
Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of like T-Pad. Where do you start? All these tracks are. Let's just take a track by track.
I don't know if I'd.
No, this is
like. This a great record? Yes, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I totally get that for you. I'm just making fun. I'm just picking at you.
I mean, My Name is Jonas is one of the best album openers. I still have yet to hear an album that has just one of the most a solid opening.
Great picking on that. Like that's
it's like
that's like a song that everyone knows and is really really good. You know what I mean? And it just to have that status is rare, I think.
Yeah. And then you have No One Else into The World Has Turned and Left Me Here. 2 tracks that are about the same person. You have like a really sexist, overbearing boyfriend who gets his comeuppance in The World Has Turned and Left Me Here and realizes what he has lost due to the actions that he has taken on. That's why I say most of these songs I relate to. I used to be like, oh, I relate to everything that Weezer, but then I was like, oh wait, No One Else. No, I don't relate to that. Sorry, sorry for the misconception there. Then we have Buddy Holly. A banger, like the Weezer song.
It's a normie choice, but it's probably my favorite song, on the album.
It is a normie choice, but it's one of the
catchy.
best.
It's a really great power pop song.
It's a phenomenal melody, honestly.
God. And that was the song that they were like, we shouldn't put this on the album. But
it's like Beatles level, honestly, of like catchy, memorable, great song topic. Like that's what I really think about when I hear this album. I'm like, these are like, and it's not to take away from Weezer because they sound like Weezer, but it does remind me, like consistency wise, of like an album like Revolver.
Well, no, you know what River's biggest inspiration is?
It's probably the beat.
No, it's the Beach Boys.
It's the okay.
Like you can see that in the
like
harmonies.
Lyrically and
I'm not much
harmony.
of a beat. I don't know much of a beat.
About harmonies.
Blah, blah, blah.
The 3-part harmonies with Rivers, Brian, and Matt are...
Sweater Song, you can hear it a little bit in the chorus.
I mean, yeah. Then we have Undone, the Sweater Song.
That's one of my favorites on the album.
It's really
like
great.
A krautrock kind of very repetitive.
The solo, like when we get to the solo on that song, it's like, whoa, what, how? And by the time it ends, like it's
I love the way the piano echoes, and it's just like...
Honestly, it's another moment that reminded me like of the Beatles a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to maybe say why.
I mean, they're both pop rock bands that have a lot of focus on the melody, and I think having the vocals right up front as well.
It is such smart songwriting, and that's why it blows my mind.
And production. Production's pretty much not a flaw with the production.
So yeah, and I was telling Jake about this. I've noticed it before, but like giving it this really detailed listen, I noticed it hardcore. I love how the bass drum is just so in the front where you can hear it distinctly, especially on like The World Has Turned and Left Me Here, that like boom, boom, boom. Like it's like a racquetball just constantly being thrown against the wall. You hear it, and it's like right in the front to the point where if you notice it, you just hear it for the rest of the song where you don't even notice like what they're singing. You just hear bass drum.
It's like the little clickety clackety sound on Willie the Pimp by Frank Zappa. It goes on for like the whole 9-minute runtime.
So then we have Surf Wax America.
That's like my second favorite track.
Yeah, that's my second favorite
awesome.
too. Like, oh man, when I learned how to play that riff on guitar, I was like one of my happiest days of my life.
That's a crazy funny song. You take your God away.
Then we have Say It Ain't So, probably definitively the best song on the album. A song about Rivers' disdain with alcoholism and how it has affected his family, his father, and his stepfather. It is a tragic song. And again, it frustrates me to hell that there's never been a song close to that in terms of depth, emotion, and just the playing when that solo.
It's a little simpler as far as a Weezer song goes, but I think Memories does.
That riff is hard though. Like that's a hard ass riff to play. When I learned to play that was really cool. I can't.
That's one of my 2 favorite songs. Say It Ain't So. I remember hearing that on the like Rock Band Wii version, like in 2007 or something.
I heard this so much because I've been on YouTube for years,
Guitar
like watching
3.
content.
My Name is Jonas.
And this was one of the songs that was everywhere. Like people use this song in so many of like the videos I used to watch. Like and like it was content that you wouldn't even think Weezer would be involved with. And I was just hearing their music, not knowing it. I hear songs that are like Memories is one of my favorite songs, and like I heard that I didn't know that was Weezer until like Jacob told me when we were just talking about when we were talking about Hurley one day or something, and I was like, that's Weezer? I was like, that's insane.
Great
That's an
song.
amazing song.
Hurley is an underrated one. Then we have In the Garage. I want to say is my favorite song, my personal favorite. Like that's the song that like me as a person I relate to. So
I think it's a
much.
really relatable song. I agree. Like him being like in the, it's like when I'm in this zone, this space, like I'm totally free of everything. Like I can just, express. And I think that's awesome.
Then we go into Holiday, which I think is like my actual favorite song.
Really? That's one of my least favorite on the album.
Oh, what?
I like Holiday a lot too. Even on my first, like when I was listening to this record to prepare for our Pinkerton
that bridge?
episode.
You don't like that bridge?
No, I think it's a good song. I just think that in terms of songwriting, the other songs just stick out to me more, and that track I think kind of outstays its welcome a little bit. Like the songwriting starts to feel a little repetitive, whereas on a song like Buddy Holly, which is similar it's actually shorter length, or Surf Wax America, it's comparable. I just think that the melodies are better on those tracks compared to this one.
That's crazy. Let's go to it for a while.
I feel like I don't have a lot more to say about this record.
Only in Dreams. One of the best album closers, period.
It's not my favorite, but
Fuck
I think it's good. It's not
What?
my favorite on the. I like the more I guess I would not to take away from them, but the kind of typical songs like verse chorus. I just think Weezer excels there. Like solo here. I just think they write really good pop songs.
That Only in Dreams is such a. This band has never ever gone to that level again. They're close on Everything Will Be Alright with their trilogy at the end. I can't remember the name. Big fan. But you have a song here. It makes so much sense in the context of what this band stands for, who listens to them, what they represent as musicians. They stand for a philosophy of anybody can be a rock star. You have the band coming out when, the hair metal phase was finally coming to an end. Nirvana was getting huge. But
Nirvana was basically done by this time.
Yeah, but they were still rock stars, like getting groupies and fan base. And then you have Rivers Cuomo and his gang of nerds, like wearing sweaters and like looking like...
Kind of like an Elvis Costello or a They Might Be Giants sort of vibe.
Or even Kanye in his early career.
Getting huge, like sold out venues. And the songs reflect that.
Like Devo, almost.
Yeah. And you have I read on Genius where it's like, Only in Dreams represents the reality. You have all these songs before it that are like, hey, I'm getting the girl, I love this girl. Only in Dreams is like, we ain't getting that girl. We're shy. We won't go say hi to her. It's just all in our mind. It's only in dreams, it's fantasy. And I'm about to get a little crude here, but it makes so much sense from a songwriting perspective, where you have these lyrics that are like, you can't avoid her, those lines, and then it says, and she's your ride home. That's the reality kicking in of that's how you know this girl, she's your ride home. And then you have this dancing in the prom where it's like you're floating. It's just so beautiful. But then you have this long guitar solo that basically represents spanking your monkey. How it's repetitive and it's dun 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 dun, and then it just kicks in the climax. It just makes so much sense. It's crude, but it's there. And it makes so much sense for what the topic is about. It just blows my mind that this band, the same band who wrote I'm Your Daddy, fucking made this song. Oh, this band pisses me off so much. They could have made 6 more albums that are just as good as this, but they keep dicking around in the fucking studio. God damn it! Making a cover album, which collectively is not as bad as I thought it would be, but it's 10 out of 10.
This album is full of very well written, great songs. There's the number one thing about this album for me is the melodies and the punchy instrumentation. You get that right off the bat with My Name is Jonas. It's a great way to start the album. The World Has Turned and Left Me Here is another one that the chorus just sticks out to me. Buddy Holly, classic pop rock song. The Sweater Song is one of my favorites. I love the guitar line on that. Surf Wax America, great song. Say It Ain't So, phenomenal song. In the Garage, great. My 2 least favorite, even though I still really like them, are No One Else and Holiday. Just, I think, a little less distinct from a melody.
If I had to pick a least favorite, it'd be No One Else, but I think that chorus is just so catchy.
I remember them, I just don't, they don't stand out to me as much.
That's another thing. There's not a single song that doesn't stand out
I think the beginning of No One Else stands out to me. I just love, my girl's got a big mouth. It's just so mean.
Yeah, so this album I think is a decent 8, and it really just rides on the strength of the songs on it. I don't have a huge emotional connection to this or anything. I just think that the performances and the songwriting is just across the board really, really fun, really, really enjoyable. It's an album that is very well written, and because of that, it stood the test of time just because of how catchy these songs are and how fun they are and how well they're played.
Yeah, and I pretty much agree. Words out of my mouth. I just think it's a great pop rock record. I think there's some great risks on here, I guess, but, risks for Weezer, I guess, that pay off in spades. I would feel like a light to decent 8. Like you, not hugely attached to it. Just think it's a great pop rock record, honestly. And it deserves its status, you know.
That's bleh.
Yeah, man, I agree. Words from my mouth.
You cannot leave that in. Don't look. No.
If I'm
no.
It's too late. It's done. All this is in, too.
This has been the final regular album discussion episode of Unwarranted Music Opinions, but it's not the very last episode ever. Since starting this podcast, we've heard a lot of albums that we never thought that we were going to hear. Some of them were terrible. I'd say most of them were great. I say the vast majority of what we heard. I am glad that we did this, and I'm glad that we were forced to listen to stuff that we might never have heard. So to do kind of a little retrospective,
It's going to be the epilogue episode.
we're going to talk about our
mortal
favorite
man.
albums, and I'm not listening to you, and our least favorite albums, and just rant and rave and talk about what we liked and what we didn't like. I think that the whole process of being forced to listen to something that you might not have heard, while that surely shouldn't be the only way that you hear music, having that happen every now and then is a good way to expand your horizons, to hear what you might not have heard, to understand that there's music out there that's outside of your comfort zone and your little bubble, and that can make the bubble expand and add more different genres of music and allow you to enjoy more music. And I think that this was a cool way of doing that. So we're going to talk about our feelings on that and all of the albums that we enjoyed and just a handful of ones that we didn't quite enjoy as much here on the final episode of Unwarranted Music Opinions. So we'll be back next time with that. I'm Jacob Lindberg, and I was here with Chaz Jenkins. Woo! And Brian Courtney.
You take your car. I take my board.
And I'll stay afloat.